We're basically in the end of Rajab. And Rajab is one of the sacred months in Islam. So one of the 4 sacred months that Allah instructed us not to wrong ourselves. We should not wrong ourselves the whole year, but definitely pay special attention to those 4 months. But Rajab also has a couple of other very interesting things we should think about when it comes every year. Alhamdulillah. Number one is that it's a mark that Ramadan is 2 months to come. So it starts to really tune us to prepare for Ramadan, which is a key thing. And subhanAllah, now almost Rajab has passed. So we'll only have like 5 weeks or so to Ramadan. May Allah keep us all healthy and bring us to the month of Ramadan and help us worship Him in the best possible way. We won't talk about the preparation for Ramadan, although we should be talking about it inshallah in the next couple of weeks, just to make sure we're ready before the month starts inshallah. But today we'll talk about something that is also very special that happened in Rajab, which is Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, which is this blessed, miraculous journey that happened to the Prophet ﷺ. And we're going to keep it short, so I won't be able to go into all the details. But I'm going to try to focus and mix between the facts that happened, so that we know what actually happened, as well as how we can implement it and apply it into our life nowadays, taking some lessons from it and some reflections from that blessed journey. Because everything in Islam really needs to translate for us into something meaningful and practical that we can do. We don't just like listen to stories to listen to stories. It's fun, but really taking the lessons and then applying it to ourselves, it's what's key here. So we start with the Isra wal Mi'raj. Before we dive into the story itself, I want you to appreciate the context that happened around the story, because it's very critical. So I want to take you back to the 7th year of Ba'athah. Remember, all this is in Mecca. All this is before the Prophet ﷺ has migrated to Medina. So even the years we're talking about are not the years we're counting now, the 1442 and stuff. This is all before the migration. So this is year 7 after the Ba'athah, after the Prophet ﷺ has received revelation. And something very profound happens in that year. The people of Quraysh are a bit fed up from the Muslims, and they're not able to stop Islam from spreading, although it was still on a very low scale. So they decide to go through a significant boycott of the Muslims in every capacity. Nobody should talk to them, nobody should marry from them, nobody should buy and sell from them. For 3 full years, they were in Sha'b Abi Talib, in a valley that basically was a severe boycott and almost like surrounded, where they couldn't do much. 3 very tough years. And some of the narrations tell us that during those years, the Muslims barely had even anything to eat. These are the narrations that we hear that the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba were putting stones around their stomach just to calm the stomach down a bit. That's how tough it was. They would just eat anything they find, even if it's just like some piece of plant. There was basically nothing. Very, very severe boycott. So put that in the background of your mind as we go through the miraculous journey. Now on top of that, so this boycott happened after, ended after 3 years. So now we're almost in year 10 of Ba'athah. Still not Isra and Mi'raj. And then happens the year of sorrow, Am al-Huzn. So this year was a very tough year of the Prophet ﷺ. He lost 2 of his biggest supporters. He lost the emotional support, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from his Sayyidah Khadija, his wife, and only wife as of then, that he spent with so many years, and that was supporting him all along. As soon as the Ba'athah came, every step of the way, he lost the Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha. And then on top of that, he loses his uncle. So Sayyidah Khadija was the emotional support. His uncle was the materialistic support. He was not a Muslim, but he was giving the Prophet ﷺ, he had his back. Nobody could hurt the Prophet ﷺ because his uncle was there. Back then it was very tribal, and his uncle was the head of the tribe, and he would stop them from doing anything to the Prophet ﷺ. So now he loses that materialistic support as well. So think about it, 3 years of tough boycott, and then a year of sorrow, where the Prophet ﷺ loses emotional support and materialistic support. And then the Prophet ﷺ has his objective in mind. He wants the Risala to continue. He wants people to embrace Islam. He wants to save people from hellfire. So what does the Prophet ﷺ do? He doesn't stand still. He goes to Ta'if. a neighboring town to Mecca. He walks there and he starts to ask people and to invite them to Islam. What do the people of Ta'if do? The people of Ta'if absolutely refuse Islam. Not just that. They get the youngers of them and the less wise, and they make them throw stones on the Prophet ﷺ until he was bleeding, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he's asked later on, after Uhud, by Sayyidah Aisha in one of the narrations, what was the toughest moment that you, Prophet ﷺ, was in? And everybody was thinking he's going to say Uhud, because Uhud was a very, very tough moment. But the Prophet ﷺ says, it's Yawm al-Ta'if. It's that day. After all this boycott, after this year of sorrow, after he went to Ta'if and they declined, there was basically nowhere he could go. And this is the very famous dua, Allahumma inni ashku ilayka dha'fa quwwati wa qillata hilati wa hawani ala nas. A very, very famous dua. You should Google, call it just dua al-Ta'if. I'm sure you're going to get it in all languages, where the Prophet ﷺ puts it all into Allah. And he tells Allah in a beautiful dua that basically the essence of it is that he only has Allah to tell about the weakness that he's suffering from. And none of that matters to the Prophet ﷺ as long as Allah is happy with him. As long as he ﷺ is doing what's right. So he puts it all out. So put that backdrop. And of course we know I just want to be short given time, but then like Jibreel ﷺ comes and asks him if he wants to basically destroy Ta'if, and the Prophet ﷺ says no. So see the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ through all this sorrow. And he could just, in a one command, destroy the whole town. He says, no. Leave them, perhaps believers will come from their ancestors. And actually it so happened that after that, in Sayyidina Abu Bakr's time, when a lot of the people left Islam, Ta'if actually stood strong. And that prophecy came through in front of everyone. But anyways, just to keep it a little bit short, then in one night, the Prophet ﷺ, in all the sorrow and challenges that he's facing, he didn't give up. He continued forward. And then he was sleeping next to Kaaba. And then the angel Jibreel comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and they start the miraculous journey. So let's just stop here for a second. As we said, we want to make sure we get learnings from that. One of the key learnings is that with hardship comes ease. Inna ma'al usri yusra, inna ma'al usri yusra. We should know that with hardship comes ease. But what we also need to know, because we only focus on that piece, inna ma'al usri yusra, inna ma'al usri yusra, that you're going to be judged on how you're acting through that hardship. The Prophet ﷺ had his goal and objective in front of his eyes. Nothing changed his drive. He went to Ta'if, he continued back in Mecca, he was doing the right things, he put it all in the dua that we can learn from. Well, it's like that should be our orientation as Muslims. Yes, we know there will be hardship, but don't let this hardship deviate you from the right path. Don't let this hardship deviate you from the right path. Because even Allah tells us in the Quran that we will be tested like the people before us. And حتى يقول الرسول الذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله ألا إن نصر الله قريب. Until أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله ألا إن نصر الله قريب. Do you think you're not going to be tested like the people before you? And think about them when they were shaken, and the prophets and the pious people were making dua to Allah and saying, when will Allah's victory come? And Allah's victory is close. It's very close, but we just need that patience. We need the perseverance. And look around us. We're also going through hardship. No comparison to what the Prophet ﷺ has gone through. But these are hard times. We're going through hardships. We have a pandemic around us. There is a lot of fitan around us. Every morning, every night, there are things that try to take us from Islam. There are things that make it hard for us, that make it hard for our kids, that make it hard for our wives, that make it hard for the family. But this is when you get tested. This is when you need to be standing the most and really holding your Islam strong and not giving up, and know deep inside with full certainty that the light will come. The light comes after it's darkest. And we see that all through the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and all through the seerah of all the prophets before him. So just keep that in mind. So that's the first thing you take from Isra al-Mi'raj, that the light will come. And it's in everybody's life. You're going to go through hardship. It's going to happen. Life is not just a smooth, like simple thing that you go through. But the idea is not to just have fun. The idea is to persevere. The idea is to show yourself first and foremost, because Allah knows what you're going to do. But it's really showing yourself that you're going to persevere through the hardship, that you're going to stand strong to your religion, that you're not going to pivot. So keep that first lesson in mind. Now the light comes, the opening comes, and Isra wal-Mi'raj happens. So what is that? Let's first go again through some facts so that we learn from it. So the first part of the trip was al-Isra. What does Isra mean? Because I know everybody, Arab, non-Arab, we use Isra and Mi'raj. What is Isra? Isra in Arabic comes from Asra, and we can find it in Surah Al-Isra, the first ayah, Subhanalladhi Asra bi'abdihi, which basically means a journey that you do at night. So if you go on a trip at night, in Arabic, that is called Isra. So Allah says, blessed and exalted is the one that took his servant in that night journey. So where was that journey from, and where did it go to? So this was, remember we were saying the Prophet ﷺ was sleeping next to the Kaaba. So it was from Mecca, from Al-Masjid Al-Haram, just from right next to the Kaaba, until Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, Palestine. So that journey happened in a fraction of a night, and even a lot more. All the story we're talking about happened in a fraction of a night, before people woke up. So that's, Isra basically means simply a night journey. So in that night journey, the angel Jibreel comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and remember back then there were no airplanes, and even an airplane wouldn't do all that trip in a fraction of a night, and gives him a miraculous animal that the Prophet ﷺ was going to ride, called al-Buraq. Looks a little bit like a donkey, but very different. So that animal would put its leg where its sight is. And we don't want to go into too much detail, but there's a lot of interesting things in that where you can start to think about what speed it was going with, because if you're putting your leg where your sight is, then mostly it's light speed, which is the strongest or fastest speed we know of, but we'll keep some of those details aside. So that, the Prophet ﷺ goes from Mecca to Jerusalem and sees a lot of things along the way. We won't discuss everything, but then sees the prophets before him praying in the Masjid Al-Aqsa. In the narration, he can see Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam praying, Sayyidina Ibrahim praying, and then the Prophet ﷺ prays with all the prophets as an imam in the Masjid Al-Aqsa. And he puts the Buraq and the Ha'id, because the Ha'id is a big deal now, which is what the Jews call Ha'id al-Mecca, where they go and cry, and we call it Ha'id al-Buraq because we think this is where actually the Prophet ﷺ put that miraculous animal in it. But basically the Prophet ﷺ prays with all the prophets as an imam. So I want you to stop on that. As we do, we stop, we reflect, we continue. A couple of very important things. I want you to think, where did the Isra start and where did it end? And Allah mentions it clearly in the Quran. Subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi min al-masjid al-haram ila al-masjid al-aqsa alladhi barakna hawla. Allah explicitly said, from the mosque that is sacred to the mosque that is far. Al-Aqsa means far. So think about that. By the way, this was still Mecca time. How many mosques were there? How many Muslim mosques were there? Was the Prophet's mosque there? No. Prophet's mosque is in Medina. What's the first mosque built in Islam? I know we have some kids here. By the way, we're not in the khutbah, so if you want to say anything you can, inshallah. But the first mosque built in Islam is Masjid Quba. So that wasn't built yet. Allah explicitly mentions in the Quran that these are mosques. Think about that and the value of the mosques. These are the blessed locations that the trip happened from. It started from a blessed location, which is a mosque, and the Isra ended in a blessed location, which is another mosque. Gives us a strong impression and a strong view of the importance of a mosque in the Muslim's life, and how important it's going to continue to be as a cornerstone of our community, as a cornerstone of developing the community is the mosque. And Allah mentions it explicitly. Another thing, we see the Prophet ﷺ went and saw the other prophets and then prayed with them as an imam. gives you the sense of continuation, the sense of pride that unfortunately a lot of us are missing nowadays. I say it in a lot of khutbah. I haven't been saying it because we've been doing through the pandemic the last year the khutbah in Arabic and it's very short. But alhamdulillah, I get today a chance to talk to you in English and a bit longer. We have neglected our religion. One of the reasons is because we're shy of our religion. The Muhammads have become Mos, so that nobody knows it's Muhammad, because Muhammad is on the link to Islam. So let's just go with Mo. Mo is good enough. And Mustafas are becoming mics and stuff like that. And you see us, we're shying away. If you're at work before the pandemic and you need to pray, you try to hide in the smallest closet. You don't want anybody to see you. If you're going to go to the Jum'ah prayer, a lot of us will just come up with a random excuse instead of being strong and standing to our religion and saying that we're Muslims and this is what we need to do, and then showing the people as role models what Islam is all about. So that Isra and Mi'raj, when you see the Prophet ﷺ praying with all the other prophets, that should give you pride in your religion, should give you the continuation of the religion. We're basically now the ambassadors of all the religion, which is one. Inna deen inda Allah Islam. It's one religion since Adam. The practices are different. وَلِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. Everybody can practice in a slightly different way. That's fine. But it's one religion. It's one God. That gives you that level of pride that you should never feel that, oh, I need to hide because I'm a Muslim. No. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Who is better than somebody that does good and says, I'm a Muslim at the end? دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ, calls to God. And then do we just call by talk? No. That's the problem. We just talk. No, you translate into action. عَمِلَ مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ. You call to God. وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا. And you implement it in your actions. Is that enough? No. Not enough. Talking is not enough. Just doing is not enough. What's the third one? وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Branding. Branding is critical. And then he says, I am a Muslim. So that they know you're the general manager and they look high upon you, you should associate that to Islam. So they look the same look to Islam. We do exactly the opposite. Some of us, إِلَّا مَنْ رَحْمَ رَبِّي, we hide from our religion. So feel the pride in Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj that the Prophet ﷺ was the leader of all the prophets. And it's a continuation of Risala. That's the continuation. That's your lineage. That's what, it's not, oh, I come from this family and that family and I speak Arabic and I speak Urdu. That's all irrelevant. Your real relevance is your taqwa and your lineage to the right, to the truth. That's what matters. So just given the time, we're going to continue inshallah. But a lot of lessons in Isra wa Mi'raj. Then we go into the Mi'raj. So remember, we're now in Masjid al-Aqsa still. The Prophet ﷺ prays with the Anbiya. Then in one of the narrations, I think Sahih al-Bukhari, is asked to choose between milk and liquor, khamr. And the Prophet ﷺ chooses milk, which is al-fitra, and then continues that miraculous journey. The angel Jibreel takes the Prophet ﷺ in al-Mi'raj. So again, as we started with Isra, means night journey. Mi'raj means going up. Ta'aruj al-mala'ikat. Okay, so it just means going up into the sky. That's what Mi'raj is all about, going up. And that's basically the essence of the journey. The Prophet ﷺ went through the 7 heavens, 7 skies, and every time he sees a prophet, and there's a small discussion that happens there. There are a lot of learnings there, but just given the time we won't be able to touch on it. But he goes, again, it shows you the lineage and the pride that we should take. Every prophet greets the Prophet ﷺ with good talk, with advice, and then the Prophet ﷺ continues that journey. In the first Sama, he finds Sayyidina Adam, first man to be on earth. Our father Adam alayhi salam. And the last one, he sees Sayyidina Ibrahim, his great grandfather, where his lineage comes from, the Prophet ﷺ. So he sees Sayyidina Ibrahim. They have also a discussion. We continue. It doesn't stop there. And then the Prophet ﷺ goes through the 7 heavens, and it doesn't stop there. Jibreel stops at some point. The angel Jibreel alayhi salam cannot continue. Everybody has their status in the eyes of Allah. Angel Jibreel had to stop. He told the Prophet ﷺ, if I continue, I'm going to burn. I cannot. This is my end. I cannot go past that. The Prophet ﷺ, in a blessed location, continues. إِلَى سِدْرَةِ الْمُنْتَهَى. You can read about it in Surah Al-Najm. Surah Al-Najm, you can read through some of the early ayats in Surah Al-Najm, it explains some of the journey. So Prophet ﷺ reaches Sidrat al-Muntaha, which is the closest any human being, and likely any being, most likely, has reached. And then basically, over there, what happens? Prayer gets ordained upon us. Before they used to pray, but slightly different, and it wasn't the 5 prayers. Prayer gets ordained upon us in this very blessed location and this very blessed time. It's the only ibadah, it's the only act of worship that was ordained upon us in the 7 heavens and even beyond, in Sidrat al-Muntaha. So think about that. This is such an important act of worship that it wasn't just simply come down through Angel Jibreel to the Prophet ﷺ, pray 5 times and do this and that. It's so blessed that Allah made it in Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj. For us to take lessons, for us to take our prayers very, very seriously, whether it's our prayers in congregation, whether it's how we focus on our prayer, it only happened in that blessed location. And we all know the continuation of the story. The Prophet ﷺ comes down, Sayyidina Musa, it was first 50 prayers. 50 prayers in a day. And I know I was telling my kids that, he's like, how would we do 50 prayers? They thought they're going to do the math, like, oh, it means like every 20-something minutes we need to do a prayer. It was 50 prayers. We don't know how it's going to happen. Perhaps it was bundled in some capacity. But then the Prophet ﷺ comes down, and Sayyidina Musa greets the Prophet ﷺ and gives him advice. He says, I've tried the Israelis. I've tried Bani Israel. Your people are also going to feel very hard to do 50 prayers. Go ask Allah for relief. Look at that. I want you to reflect on that, because these are small things that we ignore. Where was the Prophet ﷺ? He was in the most blessed location any human being has ever been. He's coming down. He's accepting advice. SubhanAllah. Humble Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. That's why he's our role model sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you're coming after visiting a king and you're way down, somebody gives you an advice, most likely you're going to shrug them off. It's like, hey, you don't know who you're talking to. You know who I just met? No. The Prophet ﷺ takes the advice to heart, goes back to Allah, and actually asks for relief. And it happens many times, and many times, and many times, until it became 5. And the Prophet ﷺ meets Sayyidina Musa again. Sayyidina Musa says, ask your Lord for relief. It's still too much. Look at the humbleness of the Prophet ﷺ, but look also at his honesty and hayat. His hayat. He then says, no, I cannot go ask my Lord. I've asked my Lord enough at this point. I cannot. See the high level of character the Prophet ﷺ was on. He's accepting advice in this moment, but he's also showing gratitude to Allah. And then Allah reveals that there are going to be 5 prayers, but 50 in the reward. Look at Allah's mercy. There's going to be 50 in the reward. So again, a lot of learnings from that blessed journey. And then the Prophet ﷺ comes down and goes back, just because I know we're running out of time, I need to conclude in a minute, inshallah. So the Prophet ﷺ comes down next to the Kaaba. And then he sleeps a little bit, wakes up. I want you to focus on 2 things that happen now. This is a miraculous journey. Remember how we started? It was just like impossible. The times were so tough for the Prophet ﷺ. He could have just been silent about that. He doesn't want another thing that they start to pick on him. Because they're not believers. They wouldn't believe it. They're going to now tell them something miraculous that your mind cannot even comprehend. What will they do? They're going to laugh. But no, the Prophet ﷺ is honest, truthful, sadiq, ameen. He's muballigh. He's conveying the message. He wakes up, he tells them what happened. He doesn't mind. His heart is connected to the skies. His heart is connected to Allah. He doesn't mind what happens around him. So he does tell them what happened. And they ridiculate the Prophet ﷺ. And of course they don't believe him. But see, who believes him? One blessed companion that you all know of. And this is where he gets his name from. Sayyidina Abu Bakr. Sayyidina Abu Bakr is Siddiq. Because Siddiq means the one that believes, that is strong on his belief. Because he was told, they came running to Sayyidina Abu Bakr. He said, look at what your friend is telling us. I mean, now he crossed all lines. Like, we were just dealing with him when he's saying all the story, but now, like, going to the seven heavens and Sidratul Muntaha and seeing the Masjid al-Aqsa, like all this stuff. I mean, enough is enough. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr says something for us to learn and remember until this day. He says, "In kana qad qal, faqad sadaq." If the Prophet ﷺ said it, then he is truthful. The details we can discuss later on. The how and all this stuff, it doesn't matter. Our minds might not comprehend it. But if the Prophet ﷺ has said it, then it is the truth. So think about that. Next time you read a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Because we hear a lot of hadith that we don't comprehend. We don't know how. How did the Prophet ﷺ says that? Well, be polite with the Prophet ﷺ. If you hear a hadith, know your status. I'm not saying you have to follow everything because you don't know the authenticity of the hadith. But be polite. If you hear somebody says, "Qala sallallahu alayhi wa sallam," then stop at that. Say, "In kana qad qal faqad sadaq." If the Prophet ﷺ said that, then he is truthful. Now let's ask a scholar what it really means. And let's ask a scholar if it's authentic or not. I'm saying you need to rush after every hadith that anybody tells you because it might not be a honest, authentic hadith. But mind how you speak about it. Mind how you act. Don't just ignore it. Don't just say, no, it didn't happen. You don't have the capacity to judge that. And you shouldn't put yourself into that situation. Now the final thing as we conclude, inshallah, the Prophet ﷺ had his Isra and then his Mi'raj. We're not going to have our Isra or Mi'raj. Those miraculous things, miracles, are not going to happen to us. But we were given our Salah. And the Salah, the prayer, is Mi'raj al-Mu'min. This is the act that you stand in front of Allah, that you talk to Allah, that you ask Allah. So next time you stand in prayer, know that this is your Mi'raj. Yes, the Prophet ﷺ was given all that journey, but you were given a piece of it. And that's one of the wisdoms, that the prayer was ordained upon us in that situation, in al-Mi'raj. So know next time when you're standing in prayer, right in a couple of minutes we're going to stand in prayer, know that you're standing between the hands of Allah. And that this is your Mi'raj. So focus, be humble, ask your Lord for what you want. And remember and connect your heart with Allah and connect your heart with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're just going to do the adhan inshallah, and then do a very short khutbah and a dua in Arabic, and then we do our prayers. Jazakumullah khair.